10 months after a 7-year relationship ended. I still moved through my own life like somebody borrowing it. I could do the normal things. I could answer messages, show up to work, laugh when the moment asked for it. But there was this draft running underneath everything. A low, unfinished ache. The kind that makes a full room feel hollow. The kind that turns late nights into dangerous places. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger from Ireland began to feel less like a stranger than anyone near me. It started so innocently. A message. A reply. A little back and forth that should have stayed light, disposable, forgettable. Instead it opened. 5 months earlier I had gone online looking for conversation, nothing more dramatic than that. A little company. A little proof that the world still had corners I hadn't already cried in. And there he was. Older than me. Funny in a way that never tried too hard. Gentle at first. Curious. Present. That word mattered more than I admitted. Present. He lived in Ireland. I lived in the United States. An ocean stood between us, which should have made it safer, cleaner, less real. Instead, somehow, it made everything feel more concentrated. Every message mattered. Every good night stretched. Every confession landed harder because it crossed so much distance just to reach me. We started with harmless details. Favorite foods. Terrible jobs. Embarrassing stories from childhood. The songs we secretly loved. The shape of our old heartbreaks. And then the deeper things came fast. Too fast, probably. He told me about the relationship that had ended before we met. I told him about the one I had poured 7 years into, only to watch it collapse anyway. He said things that sounded thoughtful. I said things I hadn't said out loud to people who had known me for years. At some point I stopped feeling like I was getting to know him and started feeling like he was getting me. That was the dangerous part. Not the flirting. Not the hours. Not even the intensity. It was the relief. The relief of being seen when I still felt newly wrecked. The relief of not having to explain the broken edges of myself to someone who had arrived already speaking the language of grief. The relief of being wanted before I had fully remembered how to want myself back. Soon we were texting all day. Every day. The kind of all day that slips into your bloodstream and changes your rhythm. Tiny check-ins in the morning. Long spirals in the afternoon. Then FaceTime at night for 2-3 hours at a time. Faces glowing in separate darkness. Both of us pretending the distance was temporary, manageable, almost romantic. He told his family about me. Or said he did. He sent photos. A smiling mother. A living room. A dog on the floor. A slice of a life I couldn't verify but desperately wanted to believe in. We planned things. Not just vague fantasies. Actual things. The places he would take me. The streets we would walk. What I should pack for Irish weather. What train I would need after I landed. What pub he wanted me to see. What little corners of his world he wanted to show me first. And because heartbreak makes gamblers out of decent people, I let hope start spending money. 2 months after meeting him, I found an incredibly cheap flight. The kind that feels less like a transaction and more like fate trying to tempt you. I looked at the numbers. Looked again. Waited for the rational voice. It never really arrived. Maybe a softer voice came instead. One that said this could be the beginning. One that said maybe pain had finally led somewhere. One that said maybe life was allowed to surprise me in a way that wasn't cruel. So I booked it. Just like that. A seat with my name on it. A date circled on the calendar. A countdown I checked far too often. I told friends I was going on a trip. I let them imagine adventure and scenery, and a bold little solo chapter. I did not fully confess that stitched into the center of that trip was a man I had never touched, never stood beside, never truly tested in daylight. Still I believed. I pictured the station. The first real look. The strange, shy moment when online intimacy has to survive the gravity of a physical room. I pictured all the awkwardness and all the sweetness after it. I pictured the relief of recognition. The kind that says, there you are. You're real. You came. For 7 days before the flight, I lived inside that future. Then one morning at 5:30, my phone lit up in the dark. And just like that, the entire story tilted. There are few sounds lonelier than a phone vibrating before sunrise. The room was cold. My brain was still soft with sleep. For one split second I thought maybe he couldn't wait to talk to me. Maybe he missed me. Maybe this was one of those absurd, overexcited messages that people in almost love send because the countdown has made them stupid in the best possible way. Instead, it was a video message. Then a long text. Then the sickening sensation of reading words that don't make sense at first because your body knows before your mind does. His ex-girlfriend had been in a serious car accident. He said he had to cancel. No, not even cancel exactly. He said he couldn't come through. Couldn't pick me up. Couldn't do the trip the way we had planned it. He needed to deal with this. He needed time. He needed to sort things out. And I remember just staring at the screen while my heart tried to decide whether to break or to defend itself. A week. 7 days before I was supposed to cross an ocean for him. 7 days before I was supposed to arrive in a country where I knew no one. 7 days before the train station. Before the plan. Before all of it. I sat up so fast the room spun. I reread the message. Then the video. Then the message again, as if the order might change the meaning. It didn't. A humiliation started spreading through me before the grief even had time to form. Hot. Immediate. Acidic. I had booked the flight. I had rearranged my life. I had built a whole emotional bridge out over the ocean, and now, with one early morning explanation, he was asking me to understand why he might not be standing on the other side of it. And the worst part was that some piece of me immediately tried to be kind. Maybe it was true. Maybe it was awful. Maybe his ex really was hurt. Maybe compassion was the only decent response. Maybe love, or whatever version of it we had, was supposed to be flexible in the face of tragedy. So I begged him not to do this, then hated myself for begging, then tried to be supportive, then hated myself for sounding supportive when my insides were unraveling. Every response from him felt thinner than the panic I was offering. He would try. He needed to sort it out. He didn't know. He would see. Nothing solid. Nothing that reached across the damage and held it still. Just missed. And once uncertainty enters a thing like that, it multiplies. Was she really an ex? Was the accident real? Was I being naive? Had every nightly call been sincere? Had I mistaken intensity for honesty? Had I handed my trust to a person who liked the theater of closeness but not the burden of showing up? I started spiraling into practical terror because practical terror is easier to survive than romantic humiliation. Do I cancel the flight? Do I eat the cost? Do I still go? Where would I stay? How would I get from the airport? What happens when all your plans were attached to one person and that person suddenly becomes fog? I had told people I was traveling, but not the full truth. Not the vulnerable, ridiculous truth. Not the part where a grown woman in the aftermath of a long breakup had pinned hope to a man in another country because he knew how to make loneliness sound temporary. I felt sick. That is the plainest version. I felt sick. I felt foolish. I felt like I had built a cathedral around smoke. So I did what people do now when their own judgment is wobbling. I handed the story to strangers. I asked what I should do. And from everywhere came this blunt, unsentimental chorus. Something is wrong. This sounds suspicious. Do not build your safety around him. If the flight is booked, save the trip if you can. Do not let this man become bigger than the country waiting on the other side of him. It was strange, the comfort of strangers refusing to romanticize my pain. They were not cruel. They were clear. And clarity can feel harsh when you're still bargaining with fantasy. But they gave me a possibility I couldn't generate alone. Maybe this wasn't the end of a love story. Maybe it was the beginning of me refusing to disappear inside one. So I called him. Not to negotiate. Not to keep the dream limping along. To end it. My voice shook. His did too. He tried to get me to postpone the trip. He even tried to give me money, as if cash could smooth over the bruise of being abandoned at the edge of a promise. He cried. And that made everything worse somehow because tears can be real even when trust is not. I wished him well. Wished his ex well. Said whatever we had was over because I could no longer trust it. Then I ended the call. And in the silence after, I realized I still had a plane ticket, passport, a week, and a choice. The airport felt like a dare. Every rolling suitcase around me seemed attached to certainty. Families heading somewhere together. Couples folded into each other. Business travelers with that insulated, practiced calm. Even the solo people looked purposeful, like they had chosen solitude instead of having it thrust into their hands at the last possible second. I was the only one, it seemed, carrying a trip that had split in half before departure. There is an awkwardness to heartbreak in public that nobody warns you about. Your face looks normal. Your documents are in order. You stand in the same lines as everyone else. And yet inside, you are dragging wreckage through security. I kept expecting my body to rebel, to freeze, to say, "This is insane, go home, refund what you can, crawl back into your own bed and never tell anyone how close you came to making a bigger fool of yourself." But bodies can also surprise you. Mine kept moving. Shoes off, laptop out, passport in hand, boarding pass scanned, gate found. At some point, action became its own form of mercy. As long as I had one task to complete, I didn't have to answer the larger question of what this trip meant now. On the plane, the Atlantic beneath us looked like a dark thought you couldn't finish. I barely slept. I drifted in and out of that thin, uncomfortable dozing that only happens in transit, where every dream is unfinished and every waking feels like being dropped. Sometimes I pictured him waiting anyway. One last reversal. One last impossible chance for the story to become the version I had paid for. Then I would remember the call, the vague apologies, the money, the way trust had already left the room before either of us admitted it. By the time we landed, I understood something brutal and clean. No one was coming to rescue the trip back into what it had been. If it was going to become anything good, I would have to build that version myself. Ireland met me first as weather in motion. Cold air, muted light, the low, strange thrill of stepping into a place I had imagined for months through somebody else's voice, only to find it now belonged to me instead. I moved through the airport in a state that was half fear, half autopilot. Read the signs, checked my phone, found my way forward. Every tiny success felt larger than it should have. A train boarded alone, a stop recognized, a bag lifted without help, a room reached. I remember the first moment the loneliness really landed. It wasn't dramatic. No collapse. No tears in the station. Nothing cinematic enough to justify the ache. It was something smaller. Watching other people be expected. Watching reunions happen around me in little ordinary bursts. A hand wave. A quick hug. Someone taking someone else's suitcase. A face lighting up at the exact person they had come there to meet. And no one looking for mine. That was the wound. Not just that he had canceled, but that I had traveled all that way carrying an arrival no one was there to receive. The first hours were awkward, shy in their own way. Not because I was meeting him, but because I was meeting a country without the emotional script I'd planned to use. I had to introduce myself to my own life again. So I began with simple things. A coffee, a map, a walk, a museum where no one asked why I seemed both dazzled and bruised. A street where music spilled out of a doorway and reminded me that a city does not stop being alive because one man has disappointed you inside it. And then something almost miraculous happened. Nothing terrible. Nothing cinematic. Nothing that confirmed my deepest fear that I was reckless, doomed, pathetic. The day just kept going. I found my way. I got lost and found it again. I met people who were kind in the casual, unadvertised way that makes kindness feel real. I felt the edges of panic loosen. In Dublin, I met up with a Redditor who had offered to show me around. A stranger, yes, but the generous kind. We went through museums, talked, walked the city, and every hour that passed gave me back a tiny piece of myself. Not the self that had fallen for a voice across the ocean. The self who could move through the world and not vanish. That first day did not heal me. Healing is too grand a word for what actually happens. It steadied me. It told me that humiliation was not the whole story. That fear could share a body with curiosity. That I was not stranded. I was simply alone. And alone, I began to realize, was not the same thing as abandoned. Once the trip stopped being about him, it started becoming enormous. That was the strangest transformation. At first, every beautiful thing I saw felt shadowed by the version of the trip that had died. A great street, but he should have been here. A great meal, but this was meant to be shared. A funny moment, but I had no one to turn toward and say, "Did you catch that?" Then day by day, those absences thinned. The country began to arrive on its own terms. I noticed how the light sat differently on old stone. How rain could make a whole street look newly invented. How laughter in pubs never seemed far away. How easy it was to meet people if I stopped guarding myself like a broken package and simply let the world brush up against me. I saw amazing sights. I met travelers with stories of their own half-healed disasters. I met locals who gave directions like they were handing over family recipes. I met a few very cute Irish boys, which did not exactly mend my trust, but it did remind me that charm was not rare, and one man did not own all the available tenderness in a country. More importantly, I met myself in motion. The version of me that chooses. The version that navigates. The version that can sit alone at a table and not interpret it as evidence of failure. The version that can wake up in an unfamiliar place and feel not panic, but possibility. That discovery was quieter than the heartbreak, but far more durable. Because the truth is, the trip had exposed more than his unreliability. It exposed my hunger. After my 7-year relationship ended, I had told myself I was coping. And maybe I was, in the technical sense. I was surviving, functioning, continuing. But underneath that, I was starving for closeness. Not romance in the glittering sense. Something more primal. Recognition. Attachment. Relief. The feeling of being emotionally chosen after so much had been lost. And once I admitted that, so many red flags lit up retroactively like windows at dusk. How fast it all moved. How readily I accepted intensity as proof of depth. How willing I was to trust consistency of contact over consistency of character. How much I filled in for what I did not know. How often I let my longing do the editing. It is embarrassing to realize how much fantasy can borrow the face of sincerity. But embarrassment, if you can survive it, becomes instruction. So I let the trip teach me. I let it show me that being alone in public did not equal being unsafe. I let it show me that solitude can be expansive when it is chosen moment by moment. I let it show me that making new memories in a place I had almost attached to him was a kind of reclamation. In Dublin, with museum halls and city noise around me, I started to feel less like the woman he had disappointed and more like the woman who had refused to cancel herself. That matters. More than I knew at the time. Because every abandoned plan tempts you to become smaller, to retreat, to protect your dignity by disappearing with it. Instead, I stayed visible to my own life. I kept going. Trains, streets, meals, conversations, rain, laughter, moments of missing what I had thought would happen, followed by longer moments of realizing what actually was happening was richer than the fantasy had ever been. The country widened me, not in some glossy inspirational poster way, in a harder, more useful way. It required me, required attention, required decision-making, required me to inhabit my own company without treating it like a punishment. And slowly, almost annoyingly, I began to enjoy myself. Not despite being alone, because something in being alone was rearranging me. The grief lost its spotlight. The humiliation lost its script. The man at the center of the original plan began shrinking to scale. He was no longer the keeper of this trip, no longer the doorway, no longer the person through whom the country made sense. He became what he actually was. A man who had occupied a lot of emotional real estate without ever proving he could build a home there. By the time I reached Belfast, I had started to believe that maybe this whole disaster was not just survivable. Maybe it was useful. Maybe being forced to let go of one imagined future was what allowed a truer one to walk in unannounced. But healing is not a straight road, especially when alcohol and memory decide to travel together. My first night in Belfast, I drank too much. Not movie star glamorous too much. Not charming, reckless, youthful too much. Just human too much. Sad girl in a new country too much. A few beers past wisdom. A few sips beyond the point where reflection stays noble and does not become self-sabotage wearing lipstick. Ireland had been generous to me. The people. The movement. The beauty of the place. The suddenness with which a day could turn from lonely to alive. But night still knew where the bruises were. And in that soft, foolish hour when old feelings disguise themselves as unfinished business, I messaged him. There it was. The last little thread. The one I apparently still needed to touch just to prove it had no current left in it. I do not even remember hoping for much by then. Not reunion. Not repair. Maybe just a sentence sincere enough to help the whole thing settle into meaning. Maybe a tone that sounded like accountability instead of convenience. Maybe proof that all those hours, all those calls, all those plans had at least belonged to two people who understood what had been broken. What came back was thinner than that. He was sorry, but it was what it had to be. That was the shape of it. Flat. Final. Without any of the moral weight I had once assumed lived inside him. And maybe because I was tired and buzzed, and finally far enough away to hear the truth without trying to protect my own fantasy, the message landed differently. It did not reopen the wound. Cauterized it. Whatever romantic notions I still had left, however faint, whatever part of me still wanted to believe that timing had simply been cruel, that circumstances had stolen something authentic from us, went out right there. Not in a dramatic blaze. In a clean extinguishing. Like a room losing the last lamp. I looked at the screen and felt something rare and almost holy. Done. Not furious. Not pleading. Not confused. Done. Because sincerity does not sound like that when it has cost someone else this much. Because care does not arrive this late and this shallow. Because even if every single detail he told me had been technically true, trust was still dead. And trust is the organ a relationship cannot outlive. So I put the phone away. And in the quiet after that tiny funeral, Belfast kept existing. The city did not pause for my closure. The streets stayed themselves. The air stayed cold. Laughter drifted from somewhere nearby. My own pulse, which had once raced every time his name lit up my screen, finally began behaving like it belonged to me again. The next morning, with the headache and the strange tenderness that follows emotional stupidity, I saw things more clearly than I had in months. I had not fallen in love with a villain. That would have been easier almost. I had fallen into a gap between loneliness and hope, between grief and desire, between what he may have intended and what I desperately needed. And inside that gap I had done what hurting people often do. I had upgraded possibility into destiny. That was the lesson. Not that I was ridiculous for wanting love. Not that distance automatically means deceit. Not that trust is foolish. The lesson was finer than that. Need can make ordinary attention feel sacred. And if you are not careful, you will start worshipping at the first place that offers shelter from your own emptiness. I do not say that cruelly about the woman I was. I say it tenderly, because she was trying, because she was lonely, because she wanted to believe that tenderness crossing an ocean meant it was durable enough to survive real life. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. But there in Belfast, with too many beers behind me and too much clarity ahead, I realized I no longer needed him to explain what had happened. I had enough. Enough evidence. Enough distance. Enough self-respect returning piece by piece to understand that closure is often just the moment you stop asking the wrong person to narrate your pain for you. So I let the story change shape one last time. He was no longer the almost boyfriend who ruined a trip. He was the catalyst who accidentally handed me one. And that is a very different role. Much smaller. Much less romantic. Much more useful. By the time the trip was ending, I understood why people talk about travel as if it can split your life into before and after. It is not because scenery fixes you. Doesn't. Beauty is not surgery. A coastline will not remove grief. A charming street will not rebuild your boundaries. A perfect pint will not restore the months you spent giving too much trust to the wrong person. But movement changes the angle. And sometimes the angle is everything. I left home thinking I was flying toward a man. I came back understanding I had actually traveled toward a confrontation with myself. The woman who boarded that plane was still measuring her worth by how eagerly someone answered at night. Still mistaking access for intimacy. Still trying to convert emotional intensity into safety. Still hoping another person could arrive quickly enough to drown out the echo left by a 7-year ending. The woman who came home was not suddenly fearless. Not magically healed. Not transformed into some polished symbol of empowerment. She was simply more honest. More honest about how lonely she had been. More honest about the red flags she had minimized. More honest about the way desire can dress uncertainty in flattering clothes. More honest about what she actually wanted, which was not endless texting, not fantasy, not a voice glowing through a screen for 3 hours every night. She wanted something real. Something lived in. Something that could survive daylight and disappointment and logistics and bad timing and awkward silences and unflattering truths. Something with weight. And because of that honesty, another decision became easy. No more long distance, at least not for a long while. No more building castles out of pixels because they look especially beautiful when you are starved for warmth. No more treating my own longing like evidence that the other person must be extraordinary. I wanted real connections, real life, real presence. The kind that can sit across from you at a table without needing a signal or a time difference or a fantasy strong enough to hold it all together. That does not mean the trip made me cynical. If anything, it did the opposite. It made me trust something better. Myself. Not blindly. Not as a slogan. As a practice. The self that knew how to navigate a foreign place. The self that could ask for directions. The self that could take disappointment and still keep the reservation, still catch the train, still wake up and find the museum, still laugh with strangers, still flirt a little, still reflect, still recover. The self that could be hurt without becoming helpless. That is the version of me I brought home. And when I think back now, the line that remains is not his excuse. Not the early morning message. Not the money. Not even the ache of being uncollected at the far end of a flight I had once imagined so differently. The line that remains is simpler. I canceled the boyfriend, not the trip. At the time it sounded like a clever little summary. A neat ending. The kind of sentence you say because it keeps the pain from looking too raw. But it turned out to be truer than I knew. I canceled a fantasy that could not bear weight. And in doing so, I kept the part that could. The trip. The choice. The life in front of me. The part where I kept going. So if I could speak to the version of myself sitting in that dark room at 5:30 in the morning, phone glowing in her hand, stomach dropping through the floor, I would not tell her not to cry. I would not tell her she was foolish for hoping. I would not even tell her the strangers would be right. I would tell her this. You are about to lose a plan. Not your dignity. Not your future. Not your capacity for love. Just a plan. And on the other side of that loss is a country full of rain and laughter and hard-earned perspective. A week that will hand you back to yourself. A story you do not yet know how to be grateful for. Go. Go anyway. Go scared. Go embarrassed. Go with your faith in him shattered and your faith in yourself still under construction. Go because a broken promise is not the end of your life. Go because there are versions of you waiting in places you have never seen. Go because one man failing to arrive does not mean the world has nothing to offer when you do. And when you land and no one is there to claim the moment you thought belonged to both of you, claim it yourself. Then keep walking. That will be the real beginning.